Hey guys, this is Will Wolf here. We're going to walk through Lab 9 together, go over some of the questions and some of the processes we're using in this one. The first question is dealing with this layer called methane here on the left. And just like anytime you bring in any data into ArcMap, you want to look at the attributes table. We're looking at methane emissions from different countries in a couple of different years, 1990 and 1995. So you have all of these, agriculture, waste, energy, and then they'll total them up in these two columns. Total 90 and total 95 is the sum of all of these. And one thing to take note of, one of the questions we ask is how do we represent cells that don't have any data? So if the country did not report any methane emissions during that time, and you'll see the numerical code for that is -999, and that will result in no data. The next step in this exercise is to plot the methane from 1990 using the total 90 column. So this is going to give us the categories from that attributes table. You're going to plot it as unique values. If you press add values, it'll bring it in. And right now I want to flip the symbols so that the highest amount of methane released is represented by the warmer, the redder colors, and then the lower emissions are represented by green. And also no data, I want to move that to, actually change that color to gray so that it stands out as a separate column. So click OK on that. And now we can see these colors represent methane emissions, and we're going to, one of the questions, question 2, asks for which of the 4 top producers of methane in 1990. So you use the identify tool to see United States, Russia, China, and India are the 4. And then question 3 is asking for the 5th most. And it could be any of these orange ones, but in order to really tell, we'll open the attributes table. We'll come over to total 1990, which is different than what we plotted. We were plotting these categories. Now we're just going to look at the actual totals. So if I right-click on that, sort it descending, that'll put all of the methane emissions in order from greatest to least, and we count down to the 5th. It looks like Brazil was the 5th highest emitter of methane in 1990 with a total of 285.7 million metric tons. So that answers questions 2 and 3, and then we'll move on. The next question concerns a different category here, the change in methane from 1990 to 1995. And so this is actually a value, so we're going to use quantities instead of categories. The value that we're going to map is change, and it will give us a range of colors to represent that. That looks good, so click apply, and now our map looks like this. And question 4 is asking for which country saw the largest drop in methane between 1990 and 1995. So that would be the negative value. Clearly from this, the darkest green country is Russia, and it saw a drop of negative 102 million tons in that 5-year period. And then which country saw the largest increase in methane between 1990 and 95? And that would be the red one, China, 48. So that's a positive number, and this is a negative number. All right, folks, for my next trick, I will be mapping the CO2 emissions from 1965 and 1998. So if I unclick methane, I've already programmed these. But what I'm showing here is year 1965 gives us the values of CO2 emissions from all the countries in that year, and I've fiddled with the range here to represent blue is the countries that did not report any data, green is the countries that reported 0 emissions, and then yellow, red, and orange are the higher CO2 emissions. And so I'll do that for both years, the 1965 year and then the 1998 year. And if I toggle back and forth, question 5 is asking were there more or less countries that reported CO2 emissions data in 98 versus 1965. So just look at the number of blue countries represented here in the 1965 data, compare that with the 1998 data, and so the answer is there were more countries that reported it. And then also looking at this one country in Africa here, if I look at the data from, this is data from 1965 is active, and this country here reported 0 emissions, and then in 1998 they reported no data. So that country is Somalia, and the question 6 is asking why might this be the case, and it's because the government had collapsed and did not report anything for 1998. which doesn't mean that they didn't emit anything. It just means that they didn't report it. Okay, now we're going to be moving on to the nitrogen oxides. So I'll make that layer active, deactivate CO2, and if we open this up, again, we're going to be plotting the change, or mapping the change in nitrogen dioxide between 1990 and 95, I think, are the years that they have in this data. And what I've done here is made this a range of values that I've specified now so that right in the middle, the most neutral color is 0. So the yellow countries represent no change. The green countries had a decrease in nitrogen dioxides, and then the red countries had an increase. So this map looks like this now. And if we're asking a question about, how many countries showed a change in NOx from 1990 to 95, that would be how many countries in this map are represented by this yellow. So it's hard to tell because a lot of these are really, really small. But if we come up to the attributes table, what we're going to do is specify this. So we could try sorting it, but then again, we still have all the zero data is tucked away in here. So what we'll do is select by attributes using this button here. And what we're going to do is, write a formula, write a question using this software. So NOx change equals 0. And what that will do is select 36 out of the 249. And if we click this button that says show selected records, it will just highlight the countries that showed no change in NOx. So how many of those countries are there? It's listed right here, 36 out of 249. And now we have them highlighted and we can do whatever we want with them. And also, why would it be so hard to count these using the map? Look how small some of these countries are. This only works for bigger countries. But that gives us a good way to map these and a good way to find out which countries exactly had 0 change. We're going to move on now to CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. And if we open this up, we are going to be plotting this value, total 1990, which again has been categorized for us as these different ranges, 0 all the way up to 10,000. And again, I will make no data gray so that it doesn't get lost in the mix there. And so now we've done that for both of these, 1990 and 1995. And question 9 is asking if we see a difference just based on this map. And it's not really easy to tell. There's still a lot of red in there. Some countries change, some countries increase or decrease. So there's really no answer to that one. And then question 10 asks us how many countries reported a decrease in CFC from 1990 to 1995. And again, we're going to open up the attributes table for that because this is more of a numerical question. So we're going to use a formula like we did in the last question. We'll select by attributes here, and we're going to ask the question why 1995 was less than why 1990. So this sets up this query. Select all of the countries where the value for 1995 was less than the value of 1990, and that will give us which countries had a decrease. So from here, we can click over to show selected records. We see 14 out of the 249 showed a decrease from 1990 to 1995. So 8,000 to 3,000, 11,000 to 0. So this could be wrong though because it includes the no data value that we looked at in the beginning. We don't want to be like this country in particular reported 0 in 1990 but then didn't report in 1995. So that doesn't mean it had a decrease, that's just an outlier. So to include that in our calculation and our question, we will be typing in a slightly different formula that will let us isolate that. So here we're still selecting countries 1995 that were less than 1990, and then also not ones that had a negative 999 value in those 2 years. So that removes Kazakhstan from this list. So now we actually only have 13 out of the 249 countries that reported a decrease. And then question 10 asks us how many countries had an increase. So again, I've cleared the selected data, and now I'm going to ask a question which ones in 1990 were greater. and that selects 63 out of the 249 showed an increase in data. Well, back. And also question 11 asks for how many countries showed an increase in CFC emissions. So we'll select by attributes again. And here we're going to do something similar to question 10, but we'll say 1995 is greater than 1990 to represent the increase. And so that's brought in 63 out of the 249. But again, we have the same problem where some of these countries just didn't report in 1990 and then reported 0. So that could represent, it's not really what we're asking. So we're going to modify this again and include a statement that says don't include anything that has a no data value. And that will bring down just 4 countries out of the 249 actually showed a increase or reported an increase in CFCs. And last but not least, we're going to click over to this Kyoto Protocol layer where we will be plotting all the different statuses of the countries at this time when they made this contract here. So we're going to use unique values, and we're going to show the status of each country, which is whether or not it ratified the protocol or it wasn't included or wasn't qualified for it. So brought in this, out of these, we're going to use a color ramp that is not a gradient because we're just trying to show categories, not increases or decreases or anything like that. And so now we have our key over here. We can see which ones have been ratified or the Annex 1 parties. We're also going to want to add labels to that. And so over here in labels, we're going to label the features. We're going to label it by the share, which is the amount of CO2 that this country was emitting, or greenhouse gases in general. And so that will bring in little numbers for every country. And if you read up in the handout, we're going to be asking about how far along the Kyoto Protocol was before it becomes effective. And it needs 55% of the Annex 1 countries need to be involved, and then they also need to account for 55% of the total emissions. So the question 14 is asking what percent more global emissions from Annex 1 parties is needed for this treaty to take effect. So the first thing to do is select all of the Annex 1 parties using our selection tool. Status equals this value here, this name, and if we pop that in there, you'll notice it comes up invalid. So when you're typing in text, you want to select by a certain text, you have to put it in little quotations. And now we'll have the 31 Annex 1 parties that have ratified it. And well, that will give us, on the right here, this column is share. So we want to see how far away from the 55 goal is this. Are all these Annex 1 parties ratified? What percentage does that account for? So to do that, you come down to statistics. And since these are all percentages already, we're going to say what's the total of all these. And that's going to be given to us here in this field share. This gives us all the stats on it, the number, the minimum, the maximum, the mean, or the average. And what we're looking for is the sum. So right now, 44.2% of the ratified Annex 1 parties account for all the CO2 emissions. And if we're asking, we need 55% to reach our goal, what's 55 minus 44.2? And that's 10.8%. So we need 10.8% more global emissions from Annex 1 parties before the treaty takes effect.